This is Radio Chatskill, and we're going to go eating upstate now in Andes, New York. Mutsi is a Finnish slang for mother, and the colloquial term captures the hospitality the owners of Cafe Mutsi hope to evoke. Nurturing, yet jovial, meticulous, yet charming. Aaron Shearer visited the all-day cafe and wine bar for the latest edition of Eating Upstate.
Located in Andes, Cafe Mutsi has its origins in owner Nicole Bassis' childhood travels to Finland. Drawing inspiration from her grandmother's recipes, it offers a contemporary take on Nordic culinary traditions, with items like cardamom buns, shrimp toast, and steak tartare. Cafe Mutsi is the subject of today's Eating Upstate. Nicole Bassis grew up in the Manhattan neighborhood of Inwood near the Bronx. As a child, she spent summers in Finland, where her grandmother worked as a baker. After high school, she studied early childhood education before turning her attention to the culinary arts, enrolling in the Institute of Culinary Education. After graduating, she worked as a private chef and taught at Taste Buds Kitchen, a cooking school with classes and programs for children and families. In 2018, she met Raoul Koopman, who had grown up in the Netherlands and on Long Island through the dating app Hinge.
We did a Hinge date and took a nice long walk together, grabbed a cup of coffee, and I think he realized early on like coffee was the way to my heart, and the rest is history. And his uncle owns a cafe in the city, Cafe Gitan, which is a Moroccan cafe that's been around for over 20 years. And so he had kind of this like family intuition of hospitality, and he's worked at his uncle's cafe for a bit. So he's done every part of hospitality and working in a restaurant except for being a chef. When I met him, he was working in tech. He was working at a tech startup full time. And so this was just kind of like a hobby and interest. And of course, he's always had jobs in the food world to help pay for life, and has always, worked since he was a teenager. Worked at his uncle's cafe, worked at a pizzeria. So he's had some food background, but I think this was like the big deep dive into it. At our cafe, he takes the lead role in the coffee part of it. So our whole coffee station, and then our just wines and cocktails.
After marrying in 2021, Bassis and Koopman decided to leave New York City for a slower pace of life upstate. Initially, they had looked around the Hudson Valley, but found real estate more affordable and attainable in the Western Catskills. Bassis is no stranger to the Catskills, however. Her parents owned a weekend house in Delhi while they were married, and her father now lives in that house full-time.
It was always on Friday, they would pack the car up, come upstate, spend the weekend upstate, and then head back down to the city for their lives for their Monday through Friday. My brother and I, any chance we got, we would come up, visit him, learn the area, spend time here in Delhi and in the surrounding Catskills area, and just fell in love with it and noticed the changes over the last 20 years of, something really cool is happening now in the food scene with the farmers and with more young people from the city moving up here. And so it just we got a yearning to be up here and be part of this and be among the trees and the mountains. I feel like I've always gotten asked when we lived in the city of like, oh, do you want to open a restaurant? When are you opening your restaurant? All of my clients that I would cook for were always asked me when I would open a restaurant. And my answer was always like, never. That's the dumbest thing to get into restaurant world. And it's so much work and it never works out. And then we came to this part in our lives, Raoul and I, where we weren't loving the city life anymore. Commuting on the trains, commuting up, up and down, wound up spending most of our weekends and most of our time when we weren't working, getting in the car and leaving in the city. So we would go to Beacon or the Hudson Valley or all the way up to here, up to the, Delhi, Andes area. And so then we started looking at houses for sale. First, close enough to the city that we could still commute to the city. So we were looking at like Beacon and Wappinger Falls and things close enough there. But we kept getting priced out of places closer to the city. And then we decided to skip a few towns. We're like, well, let's just skip all that middle area. We know the Catskills, we know Delhi. Let's start looking at things up there.
Realizing that they would need to find a way to make a living, Bassis and Koopman decided to open a restaurant. They shifted their attention to looking for commercial properties and found a building in downtown Andes that had been previously home to the cafe Two Old Tarts.
Because for me to do my job, it's physical, in-person cooking. So it's like I don't have a job anymore if we're looking that far outside of the city. And so we shifted gears from looking at houses into looking at commercial properties when we started looking all the way up here. And we saw a few different ones in different towns, but there was just something really beautiful about this property in Andes that we saw. And I remember when it used to be called the Two Old Tarts, and I was going there with my mom and my dad when it was open. And the moment that we saw the pictures of it online and then saw it in person, there was just like this gut feeling of this is a place, this feels like home.
Bassis and Koopman closed on the property in December of 2023. Cafe Mutsi, Mutsi being Finnish for mother, opened on Mother's Day of 2024. The opening date was not a coincidence.
I had this goal that I wanted to open Mother's Day weekend. Mutsi is a slang term for mom in Finnish. A lot of the recipes that we started out with are passed down from our moms, from our grandmothers, and we knew we wanted to bring something from our cultures into the cafe. And when we started doing the renovations, we closed on the cafe, I think it was December 2023. We started doing renovations, and I said, if this is doable, let's have Mother's Day weekend as our opening. And I think having that goal and that deadline really made us make quicker decisions, not sit in construction forever, open before you're ready, basically. It gives us something nice to have each year and celebrate that Mother's Day weekend, which also happens to be my mom's birthday. And so it's like a nice little celebration weekend always for us.
The menu of Cafe Mutsi draws from recipes passed down to Bassis by her Finnish grandmother. Finding ingredients to bring these recipes to life presented a challenge.
So the first recipe I started playing around with before we opened, it was our cardamom buns, which is a recipe from my grandma in Finland. And I had all of these handwritten recipes from her through the years. And as she got older, I think they got a little more, they changed up every time she wrote them. And so I tested them all out. And then I also tested a few different more modern iterations of the cardamom buns of like, okay, well, what are people doing now to make these Nordic cardamom buns? I always went back to her recipes. So it was just a ton of testing of what the traditional recipes were versus what I wanted those flavor profiles to be. And, there's certain things that I love about these recipes. It's like, I love the crushed cardamom in those buns, but we don't sell crushed cardamom like that in the US. You can either find whole cardamom pods or you can find it extremely ground. So I had to go on like a deep dive of the internet of how do I find this like crushed cardamom, and we wind up just crushing it. We order cardamom seed. We have a spice grinder that's dedicated to crushing cardamom every week in the cafe to get that specific flavor. So I think it's these taste memories and food memories that we're bringing out in the food. It's, there's this like memory that you have and it evokes a feeling in food and bringing it out.
In addition to running the cafe, they also make and sell their own condiments and baked goods, which they sell at places like First Bloom in Bloomville and at the Dear Native Grapes Tasting Room in Walton, both previously covered by Eating Upstate. Among the products they sell is bread made with a 30-year-old sourdough starter from Finland.
The bread that we do jarred up like duck rillettes and pickles and package up our granola, and our big one is our bread that we started to making wholesale, and also serendipitous that came about. Love making bread. I've had this sourdough starter that I've been keeping alive and making bread for many years. Like sourdough, the starter, it's alive, and it's something that was, created and brought to life in Finland. And it's actually a 30-year-old Finnish sourdough starter. But our kitchen at the cafe is not really set up for bread. I don't have deck ovens. I don't have a, bread proofing system. I'm making the bread eight loaves at a time in Dutch ovens, steaming them, and somehow we're getting 75 to 100 loaves through the kitchen a week. There's something about it that it's like it took in and absorbed all these things in the nature and the air and the finished flour, and somehow that's still in this starter, and I'm keeping it alive here. And when I bake the breads in the cafe, it reminds me of the smell of bread that my grandma in Finland used to bake in the oven. And my grandma was a professional baker for her whole life in Finland, so I just grew up around bread and pastries and all of these familiar smells, and it's really beautiful to wake up myself and have these smells in the kitchen. But I think it came from wanting to make everything that we can from scratch. We wanted to get what we can locally as far as our meat products, grains, vegetables when we can, and if we can't get it locally, trying to make it from scratch at the cafe. And so that rolled over to, well, we're making our own bread for the cafe to use for service. We're also going to sell it on the shelf.
Cafe Mutsi sources their beef from Gladstone Farms in Andes, pie dough from Magpies in Delancey, beer from the Chatskill Brewery in Livingston Manor, produce from Rock Royal Farm in Walton, and they also draw inspiration and source from farms at the Delhi Farmers Market, held on Wednesdays in Delhi. Early on, Cafe Mutsi offered dinner service on Friday, but discontinued it due to the heavy workload. They still offer dinner services on a pop-up basis, with the most recent dinner being hosted this past Valentine's Day.
Doing every Friday night dinners when we opened, and then after realizing being a morning cafe and also doing Friday night dinners, it was quite a bit on our schedule. We had that like early momentum of the business of like, we're going to do this. And then after a year in, we're like, okay, this is a lot. So now we started doing the dinners pop-up style. And our last one was Valentine's weekend a couple weeks ago, where we were open Friday night and Saturday night. It was really special because a lot of people missed our Friday night dinners. So we had a full house both nights, and we'll continue to do that either with another local person or highlighting a wine from a different country. We did one evening highlighting a Chilean winemaker. We've done another evening highlighting our isolation-proof gin and method vermouth, and they did a little bar takeover at the cafe. So we're always talking with our friends in the area to do something together and work together. And rising tides, how can we promote each other and cheerlead each other on for our different products?
Having lived in New York City for most of her life, driving on a regular basis proved to be the biggest adjustment for Bassis. However, this past winter has seen Bassis revisiting her own previous occupation as a personal chef, offering healthy and bespoke meal prep for customers.
Yeah, so we just started rolling out meal prep services. It's something that I was doing in the city, the private chefing. And as the slow season was coming about now in the winter, everyone's hunkering down. People aren't going out to eat as much. It's not as social, but work is still going on. And that question of what's for lunch, what's for dinner, how am I going to get something delicious and healthy on the table is still on everyone's mind. And I have this experience of customizing menus and private chefing. So it's something that we've gradually rolled out. And I have a few clients that I'm cooking for from the Mutsi kitchen, preparing meals for, and delivering to them, or they come pick up. And so that's really cool to see this New York City part of my career up here in the private chefing. I grew up without driving in the city. You took the subway everywhere. You took cabs everywhere. And I didn't get my driver's license until I was 27 years old. And then I never used it. And so really, I dove headfirst into driving, and now this winter has been also the first time commuting because we don't live right behind the cafe anymore. We used to live right there next to the cafe, and I would roll right out into the cafe, but now we live 20-minute drive away. So I'm driving in every morning, driving in the winter, plowing and snow, and really just living with the elements up here. That's been the biggest adjustment. The beautiful adjustment from the city to up here has been the amount of community and the people around that you see every day, and you really do know your neighbors and the people, and we have regulars that come into the cafe every day, and that's something that I didn't have a lot of in the city. And so I've grown into it, and I love it, and it's really special to have so many familiar faces in the area.
Cafe Mutsi is located at 22 Lee Lane in Andes. I'm Erin Shear. Eating Upstate is a production of WJFF Radio Catskill.
And thanks, Erin. That'll do it for this edition of Radio Chatskill. Happy first day of spring. And a reminder, we'll hear from Dan Hoost next week. He was off today on vacation. Good for him. But he's back for his regular appearance next Friday with news from the Sullivan County government. Have a great weekend. Thanks for listening. I'm Tim Bruno.